Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our YouTube channel, Sharang and Sharvari. So, first and foremost, apologies for the delay in making the YouTube video, but I am really busy right now, being a father and taking care of my child. And additionally, there are also some career-related things which I was, I was just busy. And apologies for the same, but here I am back. And my topic for today is what if Christianity was critical in the formation of Europe, but may no longer provide the answers that Europe is looking for today. Right. So I need to give you guys a brief history lesson that when did Europe first become a Christian country? Right. So Christianity is actually not a European religion. It's basically a religion from the Middle East. Right. So the Middle East is the birthplace of three monotheistic religions, or the three most famous monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, as well as Islam. Uh, it was the time of Pax Romana, that is, the Romans had conquered and pacified all of the countries, right from France, right from Germany, right from UK or Great Britain, and essentially all of Europe was under Roman domination, along with parts of North Africa and parts of the Middle East. So, in this huge Roman Empire, the Romans were facing continuous resistance, particularly from people such as the Gauls. Or ancestors of the French people, Germans, or the ancestors of Germans who slaughtered Roman legionaries, especially in the Teutoburg forest, along with stiff resistance from the Anglo-Saxon tribes. Their culture was significantly different from the Roman culture. The Romans had a much more organized polytheistic kind of religion where they worshipped Zeus, Poseidon, Hera, etc. in temples, things like that. And of course, it had elements of war, but it was not a completely warlike religion. On the other hand, the shamanistic and pagan practices of the Gauls and Anglo-Saxons were very much warlike. So if you look at Vikings, right, their definition or their version of heaven was Valhalla, right, which was essentially you feasted and fought with Odin and died in battle only to be resurrected the next day, so the whole thing could begin again. So they were culturally a very, very warlike people, which defined Western Europe. However, they were pacified to some extent by the Roman Empire and integrated into their vast empire. While this was happening on one end of the Roman Empire, on the other end in the Middle East, they were facing some problems, especially with the Christians as well as the Jews. So the Christians and Jews, Romans had a problem with them. The simple reason was that they rejected all the other gods and refused to make sacrifices to them, and they said, no, we only worship one God, that is their monotheistic definition of God. And this caused a problem in the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire did practice, especially towards the end, some horrific practices against the Christians. So Roman Empire by that time had fallen prey to decadence, as all societies eventually do, and they had brutal practices like feeding innocent Christians to lions just because they had some religious differences, or having men kill each other in gladiatorial combat, things like that. Circus, bread and circuses. It was a brutal place towards the end. Before that, it was a pretty magnificent empire. At such a time, Christianity provided a much more quote unquote civilized alternative. It was based on the teachings of Jesus Christ, who famously said that you should turn the other cheek, that it is more difficult for a rich, it is, it is more difficult for a rich man. It is easier for a camel to walk through a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven, or something like this. My Christian friends are feel free to correct me in the comments. He also had a very pacifist message about turning the other cheek, and as he was being killed, he's supposed to have said that, forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do. Forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. It really practiced or pushed for a message of living in peace and harmony with most people, while being at the same time being slightly intolerant of those who did not have your religious beliefs. Point being, long story short, that the Roman emperor, Augustus, he adopted Christianity. He became a Christian himself, and once it got adopted as a official religion, it really spread like wildfire all throughout the Roman Empire, and it also spread through the quote unquote barbarians who had been pacified with force by the Roman Empire sometime back, right? And when they adopted it, like, so how curious is it, right, that the same people who would be classified as barbarians 2500 years ago would now be classified as quote unquote the most technologically advanced people in Europe, that is the English, the French, and the Germans, right? So how did Christianity help Europe? So if you look at the theories of Carl Jung, and this is also what I personally believe from my personal experiences, that is, it provided a very important force balance. So these were people who had a warrior culture. And if you practice a warrior culture for many, many generations, chances are that only the warriors get to breed. So there has been evolutionary selection for warriors. So in this society of warriors, if you want to push it towards industrialization and modernization, then you need peaceful coexistence, then you need cohesion. And in this society of hardcore warriors, Christianity was that soothing balm. It allowed for bonds to form. The Catholic Church discouraged cousin marriage, which allowed the for the destruction of clans and your loyalty to sort of a nation state, or at least an organization, so to speak. It also promoted science. It for a long time, the Catholic Church was the preserver of ancient knowledge, which was instrumental in the Renaissance, since they discovered, a lot of scientists were actually Christians. So Joseph Mendel, who discovered Mendelian inheritance and genetics, was actually a monk or a friar, you know. Point is that Christianity really helped a lot in building social cohesion for a group of people who maybe needed it the most. And I think you can argue this way or that way that, was Christianity really needed? Whatever. Until you look at clear-cut historical examples, and you start before with the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. So long before the First and Second World Wars, there was a philosopher who at that time was considered a crazy person, and died in pretty much, died being completely unknown to the world, named Friedrich Nietzsche. That at that time, much before the First and Second World Wars, he had proclaimed, Gott ist tot und wir haben ihn getötet. Wie trösten wir uns die Mörder aller Mörderer? That is, God is dead and we have killed him. What absolution, what forgiveness there lies for us, because we are the murderers of all murderers. And people at that time did not take him seriously, because what he believed was that Christianity was an edifice upon which the entire modern industrial European states were built. And if you took away Christianity, which was the ideological and moral edifice, then these states would default into totalitarianism and barbarism. Similarly, Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, also believed that the Germans had something called the Odin switch, which is that you flip a switch and they transform from the most orderly, peaceful, coordinated, law-abiding kind of people into these total, hardcore, brutal warriors. And this is what Carl Jung believed as well, or this is what Carl Jung believed. And like, without being disparaging of anyone, I think I've observed something similar in my personal life in Germany as well. So this was Nietzsche's warning, and actually it came true. So if you look, so let's take a comparison, and let's compare the USSR, Nazi Germany, and the state of United Kingdom or Great Britain. In both the Nazi Germany and USSR, religion began to play a smaller and smaller role. In Russia, because they adopted communism, and communism is you have to disavow God. And in Germany, it happened because they were furthest along the track of industrialization, and Hitler's beliefs were more about Darwinistic competition. And there is a lot of evidence that Nazis held Christianity in contempt, because of course it has a Jewish tradition, right? Like the Old Testament is shared amongst the Jews and Christians, and of course then came the New Testament. So Hitler, being the paranoid idiot that he was, saw a Jewish conspiracy in everything. So he thought, and everything Jewish was to be discarded, including quantum mechanics, theoretical physics. So this stupidity by the Nazis caused them a lot of harm, and it allowed them to disparage Christianity as a Jewish thing. But The point being that whenever Christianity was taken away from these societies in the Second World War, these were the societies which were the most brutal and most barbaric to each other and to the world. So, for example, the USSR had a policy of extermination of the what they called kulaks. So, how many million people Stalin killed, God only knows. And in the Second World War, roughly 20 million USSR soldiers were killed. It was the explicit stated policy of the Nazis to create Lebensraum für die arische Volk, that is, living space for the Aryan people or the Aryan race. So they wanted to literally eliminate entire groups of people, which is a horrific thing to do. Compare that with Great Britain. Did Great Britain commit atrocities? Yes. They engaged. They often would not lift a finger when there would be famines in Bengal in India as well as in Ireland. Millions of people would die. A lot of the times due to British policies. They would often, they would often commit sort of human rights atrocities. There was a peaceful demonstration in Jallianwala Bagh in India, and the British government just fired on protesters. However, at the same time, if we are being reasonable and look at history in an objective way, you have to concede that compared to the Nazis and the USSR, it was much better. For example, uh, people like Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, great man, salute to him, Bhagat Singh, they often engaged in violent activities against the British people because the British were a conquering people who had colonized us against our will. The British, when they arrested these people, they put them to trial and they were found guilty, and then they were sent to brutal punishments. But who was spared was their family. On the other hand, this does not exist in USSR or Nazi Germany. Germans would often line up entire villages and kill them just to send a message. They had a policy of racial, caste system, and the USSR too. They believed in collective punishments and collective guilt. They believed your entire group was responsible somehow. So I do believe that Christianity kept a lot of things in check. Similarly, Christians played a crucial role in the abolition of slavery. So many times, most of the crusaders against slavery were actually Christians who believed that God had endowed everyone with a soul, and therefore everyone deserved some liberation. So point being that Christianity played a very crucial role, and when removing it from European society, it more or less led to disaster. So it was a net positive for their societies. Today, how are things? Today, Europe is one of the least religious places in the world. If you look at Scandinavia, Finland, Norway, most of them, the churches are empty. Same as the state in Germany, especially amongst the youth and the modern generation. Very few people care about church. Today's Europeans are much different from their ancestors, right? Because they have lived especially after the Second World Wars, they have lived for 70 years in a very peaceful times, and their a message of tolerance and diversity has been hammered or forced down their throats. Then we come to the logical negative attribute of the same thing. So, as I mentioned earlier, that Christianity provided a necessary force balance, right? The Germans or the Anglo-Saxons had an innate warrior culture, and Christianity provided a force balance to achieve societal cohesion and keep the society wonderful, peaceful, technologically advanced, so on and so forth. But now it's going the other way, right? That is, Europe today won't even defend itself when foreign immigrants are pouring in. Can you imagine that happening 100 years back? I don't think so, right? They would have violently pushed them back, no questions asked. But today you find many times, and according to a lot of historians and sociologists, Europeans seem to be intent on committing civilizational suicide. Europe has declined in the past few years, and especially when I was there in Germany, I often found Germans quite fascinated with Hinduism. They were often fascinated with Hindu beliefs, and I truly believe that it is because Hinduism to them is foreign, but strangely familiar at the same time. And the reason is that long before Germans were Christians, they were actually people who believed in Deus Pater, or the Sky Father. Um, they had a very animistic, shamanistic sort of culture, polytheistic, and believing that you're part of a network of life and all of these psychedelic and spiritual experiences. And this is very, very similar to Hinduism. Additionally, Hinduism, I believe, or maybe I'm biased, but I do believe that Hinduism is the most one of the most balanced philosophies in the world, simply because it has had a much, much, much longer time to evolve over time. So we have seen many of our civilizational cycles. We have seen decline, rise, decline, rise, decline, rise. That is why we tend to believe everything is a cycle, and that is why the person that we idealize the most is not Jesus Christ. The person that Hindus tend to idealize as the perfect man is actually Maryada Purushottam Prabhu Sri Ram, who was the king of Ayodhya, who definitely fought when it was time. He was a king. It was his duty to protect his people, and when he saw something evil, it was his moral duty to go out there and fight. And but his default state was peaceful again. And I think this is the kind of force balance that is, so in the absence of an external force balance, maybe what Europe needs is a new ideology with an internal force balance, where the two extremes of humanity, one which proposes peaceful coexistence, the other one which is a violent savage chimp which just wants to kill and butcher and take over a territory. Both are required, by the way, and they can hopefully achieve a sort of a force balance. uh, the balance of the yin and a yang, so to speak, a balance of Shiva and Shakti, a balance of the masculine and the feminine, just a balance which is crucial for peaceful harmony and coexistence. And I, for one, wish Europe and Europeans the very best in discovering this new ideology. And I would encourage everyone, every European especially, but everyone in the world to read the Bhagavad Gita, because that is, I believe, the best book on philosophy that I've ever read. Thank you, Jai Shri Ram, and Happy Diwali.